everyone, and welcome again. Another international guest here on our Farol de Pouso podcast, your weekly podcast on all the streaming platforms every Monday. Félix here, and once again, I would like to thank a lot to our supporters. Hangar 33, the aviation brand that we love and we wear. And I don't know actually when is this episode going to be on air, but we have some stuff on some aces up our sleeve, right, Guilherme, for bringing some Hangar 33 clothing with us to some nice trips that we're planning. Yeah, that looks amazing.
Hopefully. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, Realizar Aviation School down there in the southern part of Brazil, in the city of Torres. If you are getting ready, or if you want to be ready for the market, which is growing again, just go ahead and go get your licenses, or go get fresh and up to speed with aviation. And as you know, Guilherme is here with us today, and we have special co-host Henrique Carneiro, as most likely you remember him from that episode with Captain Teresa, so he will be with us. And to welcome our amazing guest, Mr. Daniel Bolton, as known as aka That Mallard Guy. Welcome.
Hey guys, how are you going? Thanks very much for having me.
We're doing just fantastic. When normally we say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and today it is the case, right?
Yeah, well, it's lunchtime here, I guess. Some of you are waking up and some of you are going to bed shortly, so
actually they should be sleeping right now, huh?
Yeah, they should be sleeping. Okay,
by the time we are recording, what time is it and where are you, Daniel?
It's just past lunchtime. It's nearly 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm here in a town, or a capital city, called Darwin, in the top end of Australia. So yes, an Aussie, so g'day mate, and g'day all mates. So
g'day mate.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm here for, really, the most. You just want me to say g'day mate. That's really all you want me for, isn't it?
Right, and thanks. This was another Farol de Pouso podcast now.
Exactly, yeah. Let's wrap it up there.
Absolutely. Guys, just go ahead and shoot whatever you want to shoot. Guy and Henrique, welcome, man.
Yeah, I want to say hello to everyone. For me, it's let's say good night. It's midnight, or 20 minutes past midnight. And it's a pleasure being here. I've been a huge fan of Daniel for a long time, following his Instagram for quite a long time, seeing all those amazing pictures and videos of the Mallard, and I'm very anxious to know all about this amazing flying aircraft. I love old planes, and this, if I'm not wrong, is like 1949.
Yeah, 47. Yeah,
47. Okay, so yeah. 1947. It's just amazing. I can't wait.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward for that. Right now here it's like 1:20 a.m. in Brazil, so. Yeah, that's going to be a really good early morning conversation about the Mallard. Yeah. I was looking up for the aircraft, and I mean, I have some really good questions about it.
Oh, I'm looking forward to hearing them. And thanks very much for getting up at the middle of 1 a.m. in the morning to talk with me. Appreciate it.
And on behalf of the entire crew, the other guys, unfortunately, they couldn't come. They are either busy flying or busy working or doing something. But when I came to them saying that you will be here, they were like, "Oh my God, I wish." So I'm very confident they will be very glad to hear. So regards from them as well. Hey, Daniel, tell us about your flying, man. Let's rock this.
Sure, mate. Yeah. So, like as you guys have already kind of mentioned, that I fly a Grumman Mallard flying boat up here in Darwin, Australia. It's for a pearling company, so the main work we use the aircraft for is for South Sea pearls, probably the best pearls in the world, and that's how the company can afford to have three 75-year-old flying boats still operating to this day. So we have 3 of them. We have 6 pilots. They're multi-crew aircraft, all IFR. So we have captains and first officers. Full IFR procedures, except and basically airline procedures, but except we get to land on the water at the other end. So it's very unique. Good fun. It's a good lifestyle job. We kind of generally fly 2-3 days a week. Busier in what we call our dry season, which is actually our winter. But then we have 2 seasons rather than the 4 seasons that everyone knows, being summer, autumn, winter, spring. We have the wet season and the dry season. So very busy in the dry season. That's our kind of tourist season as well, where we get to do a bit of charter work, taking guests to fishing camps, coastal camps, fishing boats. So it's a great gig. It really is probably a dream job, I think.
It's I think you must be happy when you come to realize that you ended up in a dream job and on a dream job like that, right?
Yeah. So before this, I was probably in seaplanes for about 8 years. So I'd already got a good, comfortable feeling of seaplane flying. The Mallards were never on my radar, to be honest. It was something that was kind of up in the top end of Australia, and I think I was always probably the guy who wanted to go to the Maldives, flying the Twin Otters in the beautiful waters there. But after I was married, I don't think it's it's probably more of a single person's job, go there, work really hard and fly some pretty cool planes. And then maybe when you have a family, you probably want to get out of there, I think. But this job came up, I took it and never really looked back at all.
How is your operation then? Which destinations do you fly to from your base up in Darwin? Do you go to this islands nearby, or are there some farming areas? What do you do?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we still use mallards comes down to our operation is we actually cover quite a long distance. So we're flying into the Kimberley of Australia, which is in a different state. So I'm based in the Northern Territory. We fly about 2 hours most of the time to get to one pearl farm, and that's at 180 knots TAS. So it's a quick aeroplane for a seaplane. It carries a good payload, and we can access really remote parts of Australia by landing on the water. So, as I mentioned, the reason why we still use the Mallard to this day, why do we use a 75-year-old flying boat? Well, it's because there's no other aircraft really that is capable of doing what this aircraft can do. We're flying to the places in what's a region called the Kimberley, and it's a beautiful remote area of North and Western Australia. We have about 2 or 3 pearl farms that we regularly fly to in that area, and they're either a land-based farm, so that is only accessible by boat or by seaplane, or it's a vessel that moves around different farm locations and we just fly to the vessel. And the main type of work is to do crew transfers. So the passengers are doing fly-in, fly-out work, maybe a week on, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. They're using the Mallard as their transport. And then we're also flying in fresh produce and food stores for the vessels or the farm.
See, so doing the crew positioning and supplies as well. Yeah, exactly. And this actually answers the question on why getting a Mallard and putting these PT6 engines on it, right?
Yeah, so as mentioned, the Mallard being 75 years old, the PT6 engine was not invented for another 25 years. I mean, the PT6 is 50 years old itself. So originally the Mallard had radial engines in them, and in the 70s, a company called Félix did the first turbine conversion, and there was about 8, I think, done. And a lot of those famously flew for a company called Chalks out of Miami, flying into the Bahamas, generally with turbine Mallards. When Pasquale bought these aircraft, they had one turbine and two radials still. So they still had piston mallards. And this was probably 30 years ago. They found that the radials were just too unreliable. They were breaking down too often, and they weren't. Yeah, you didn't get as good maintenance support from the people who build the engines. So they wanted to have the other two radials made to turbine, and long story short, basically, instead of going back to the original owner, which was 20, 30 years before that they built these turbines, they actually decided to redo them themselves. So the aircraft then got flown to Perth, which is a fair way away from Darwin, down the southwest of Australia. And the first one took 6 years, and they did a turbine conversion themselves. And then the other two actually got put in as well. So all three aircraft were changed to be what's called the AT Mallard, or Australian turbine. So our three Mallards that we have are actually all completely unique to all the others. But when I say that, there was only 59 aircraft ever built, so they're not very common as they are anyway. But yeah.
And such a beautiful, beautiful airplane, huh?
Yeah. That's amazing. And what about spare parts? If there was only 59 airplanes built, how do you find spare parts? Is that easy or?
You don't find spare parts. There's really no spare parts. Exactly. Yeah. So I think we're at the phase or at the stage here now where there's just not many spare parts around the world at all, and we have to basically take the blueprints of the parts to a manufacturing company and have them rebuild these parts to scratch. So unfortunately, we are in a place where being the only ones in the world who needs these parts, built up, companies can probably take advantage of that fact and make some good dollars. But it means the operation is pretty costly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you, like, that company called Amphibian Aerospace Industries.
Yep.
What comes to your mind with that, with the project they have?
Yeah, so that's a completely separate project to us. So they're focusing on the Grumman Albatross, which is the bigger version of the Mallard, basically. So Grumman built four main flying boats, twin-engine flying boats: the Widgeon and the Goose, which are a bit smaller than the Mallard, and then we have the Mallard and then the Albatross. Now the Albatross is 2.5 times bigger than the Mallard, so it can take up to 28 passengers and about 3 ton of freight. So it's quite a big aircraft. Now there was only one ever turbine conversion done for the Albatross, and it wasn't successful. So that there was never that success that ran with a turbine conversion with the Albatross like they did with the Mallard. And the AAI, the company you just mentioned, are looking at rebuilding or building basically a brand new turbine model Albatrosses, and it just so happens to be that it's happening in Darwin at the base that I'm in now. So very coincidental that they've ended up here as well. It's more of their business model, I guess, is at a stage where they need some funding from most likely a government organisation, and our government here has kind of chipped in to help get the ball rolling a little bit, because they know that if this takes off like it should, there's going to be a lot of jobs coming to Darwin for that project. So they're obviously very much in the infancy stage. They do have an Albatross down near Melbourne, and it's getting some maintenance done to be returned to a flyable state. It flew about 5 years ago, but it needs a little bit of maintenance done, and then it will be up into Darwin there, and then they'll then do the STC for a turbine Albatross with the use of PD6 engines, the most powerful ones, the 67 Fs, I think they are. And then yeah, hopefully in a few years' time, we may see, the rebirth of a classic flying boat like the Albatross, being manufactured again, which would be pretty amazing.
Interesting that you mentioned with that being a
nice.
coincidence. Because I saw some, was following some, actually I follow them on LinkedIn as well. And because it's kind of the same type and the same setup of flying boat with a turboprop, I thought maybe they would be targeting at the same niche as you guys are flying over there.
Yes, well, I mean, so realistically, we are the company that we are is probably the biggest flying boat charter company in the world at the moment. I mean, there are bigger flying boats out there like the CL415, for example, but they're in the water bombing, aerial work categories. As far as passenger carrying flying boats, we're the biggest in the world. There's no one else doing charter still in a bigger aircraft than us. So I guess looking at that, you probably would think that we would be a prime target, I guess. But then I think a 28-seat aircraft versus what we take is about 13, maybe a little bit too big. But I think they've got enough interest in certain areas around the world for an amphibious 28-seat aircraft that will, meet the regulations like a small Dash 8 or a Saab, for example, will conform to. So I think there's enough market options out there, and then obviously they're not stressed about whether it's for civilian use. They might look at military use as well, and also like humanitarian stuff when they're doing rescue work and search and rescue as well. So I think there's a fair bit of there is a bit of a hole in the market for that size flying boat, but we'll just kind of see what happens with it.
Yeah, that's
really
very nice. I have a question about flying. I'm really curious because it's a mixture of an airplane and a boat, right? You call it a flying boat. So what are like the main differences of landing in water? What do you have to pay attention at it? And if you can talk about some threats as well, like the gear down landing on water and everything.
Yeah, so I mean, it is. We are pretty lucky that this is like a multi-crew, IFR airline almost. So we run pretty good standards in the cockpit as a multi-crew, fully IFR. But the difference is we get to go land on the water at the end, and so we have to think. Let's take that for example to start with, and talk about. A lot of people think about IFR flying and coming to an airport that has an instrument approach. So when you go to a water landing location that doesn't have an instrument approach, well, you now need to just descend to things like the lower safe, or if there's an airport nearby, going down and doing an approach near the airport and then getting visual and transferring visually to the water. So there are some kind of unique things about that. As far as actually flying the aircraft, it's really hard to answer because it's so familiar now, I guess, after flying seaplanes for about 13 years now. But some of the biggest threats, obviously, when you think about water operations, you're no longer now landing on a fixed runway surface. So when we go into our water landing locations, we've got to think about things like, where is the wind coming from? How do you know where the wind's coming from when you don't have a windsock? Well, there's other ways to determine the wind direction on the water. There's other clues. Things like the wave height. The aircraft has a wave height limitation, but then how do you judge how high the waves are when you're doing 80 knots at 10 feet off the water? That's not very easy. So that comes down to experience. Boats, you're going to an area where, think about the runways that you guys would land on that generally clear of traffic because you've got air traffic control. Well, we've got boats that could, dive out in different directions at any different time. So it's all keeping an eye on that. And then when it comes down, like you said, to the actual water landing, there's different threats. Like, we now have to think about doing a wheels up landing instead of putting the wheels down. So, and in fact, I've done a lot of training now on the Lake Buccaneer up here in Darwin. And I still get pilots who, after, maybe a few hours of doing water landings, they still go to grab that lever and put it down because that's the primacy that they've learnt from, the whole mindset is the gear has to go down for a landing. Well, now as an amphibious pilot, you now think about what you're landing on and where your gear needs to be for that landing, rather than landing gear down. So it's a small mindset change as well, but it needs to be adjusted so that you don't make those mistakes. Because as you mentioned, the gear down water landing is one of the biggest threats for an amphibian pilot, and it can turn from everything being normal to being upside down underwater in a matter of 2 seconds. Do you know what I mean? So checklists are very important. Being in the mindset of what are we actually landing on and where does the gear need to be. But so there's a lot of differences, but I think that's what also makes it a bit more challenging and a bit more interesting. Having those, sometimes you might get to a water landing location and you don't have a place to land. You've got to think outside the box as to where you can take the aircraft and maybe do the transfer. Can you get the boat to move to a different bay that's a bit more protected? So there's a lot more thinking and a lot more thinking outside the box that you have to do, which makes it a lot of fun.
I think that's also when you transition from a conventional aircraft to, for example, to the Mallard. You also have a huge ergonomics difference on that. For example, the throttles, you are pretty much grabbing them on the top, where on most aircraft they are sitting in a really lowered position. So what else can you see from the regular for the land aircraft to those amphibious ones during your operation?
So if you haven't even thought too much about seaplane flying, one of the biggest changes that you get when you come into a seaplane is that seaplanes don't have brakes. So when you're on the water, it's just like a boat. So you can't, let's take a land plane pilot, for example. He starts up the engine, he's got the park brake on, he's running his checklist with his head down in the cockpit, maybe doing radio calls, setting all the GPS up. In a flying boat or a seaplane, you're on the move all the time. So you need to always be looking out as to where you're going, what's in front of you. But with that, I guess, comes an advantage that on the water, generally you have a more open area. So it's not like, if you had to do that, on the taxiways that we all taxi around on, you'd be hitting every other aeroplane, every time. But you make sure the aircraft is positioned away from the rocks or away from other boats or whatnot. So certainly that's a big factor, and you have to get adjusted to that. Some other things that are unique with the Mallard, for example, is we have, we can pick up a mooring, for example, and we access, or we are able to pick up a mooring by using the first officer to go through a little tunnel, basically under the instrument panel in the cockpit, and they go into the nose bay of the aircraft, and then there's a little hatch above them that they can open up and pop out of the hatch there, and use a hook to pick up the mooring. And as a captain, you're sitting there with, like you said, your hands are up high, you're hanging off the throttles in reverse and beta, and you're just driving this aircraft very meticulously to the mooring for him to pick that up and tie you off and then shut down. And one of the cool things about the PT6, for example, is that these engines, the props have prop locks in them. So as the engine shuts down in fine pitch, a normal PT6 would actually lose oil pressure and go into feather, but our props can actually stay in fine pitch. Now, the reason for that is generally you need to have control of the aircraft straight away. As I mentioned, we don't have brakes, so once we get a start, we need to be able to reverse or move forward straight away. Otherwise, the plane will just be drifting for potentially up to 30 seconds. And something people don't realize is that there's a fair bit of thrust that comes out of the exhaust on a PT6. It'll actually move the aircraft forward quite substantially. So a couple of unique things I think about this aircraft.
Oh, well, that will be part of my
Very
question
nice.
about
Felix,
winds and tides.
Just one side note. After my question about flying the airplane, the airplane, you guys could not see, but then open up my smile from one side to the other. It was amazing. I cannot even imagine how fun it is to fly this airplane, and seeing your smile just made me realize it's really, really fun.
Yeah, and I guess on a side note on that is like, it is super fun. And one thing I've really enjoyed over the last few years is actually sharing how unique this operation is, like through Instagram and through the podcast that I've started as well. And the podcast is probably more about sharing other people's experiences in the seaplane world, just in general. But certainly through the Instagram, I've really enjoyed sharing the uniqueness of this aircraft. And like, I think one thing I pride myself on a little bit with the Instagram is it's not about me. People don't come to look at me. It's about coming to watch the Mallard and what we do as pilots and flight crew. And I really enjoy taking photos. I enjoy making the videos and sharing this unique operation that we have.
As your Instagram says, right? You are the guy that flies the Mallard. Now the Mallard is part. It's part of who you are now. So it is nice, pretty good combination. Yeah, my question was actually answered already on that difference, on like having proper control, going to forward and reverse thrust at all times, because like the effects of winds and maybe the tides and the surface.
Yeah, so I mean, you brought up winds there as well. Like, it's pretty obvious one, but airplanes, they fly with the nose pointing into the wind. Well, when you're on the water, if you've got a tailwind, well, the plane always wants to what's called weather vaning or weather cocking. It wants to just spin back around and turn into the wind. So, for example, just taxiing a seaplane downwind, it's not an easy job. The plane just does not naturally want to go straight. It wants to always turn around. Taxiing sideways with a crosswind, it might weathercock on you and you get stuck, and you could be in a position like in a small river where if it turns on you, you might be pointing at trees, and you might be in a seaplane that doesn't have reverse, it doesn't have the differential thrust of two engines. So you've got to then think out the box. Do you need to increase your drag, maybe put the gear down in the water so that you don't go rushing into the trees there or something like that? There's lots of ways, and it's funny because, as I mentioned, I'm doing some seaplane training now. You can get the qualification in 7-10 hours, but it's a license to learn, as they say, like a commercial license, for example. There's so much learning and so much different experience you can get flying in different places, different water landing areas, and all around the place. So you've got to, it's just always thinking and predicting the future of what the aircraft's doing as much as possible.
Let's talk a little bit more about that.
The CFI on the Buccaneer, and also you were talking about taxiing the Mallard. Just came a weird question on my mind. Do you guys have rudder, like the water rudder on this airplane, or you don't?
No, so the Mallard does not have a water rudder. It's all differential thrust, so all differential power. Whereas the single engine aircraft do, yeah. Okay,
nice.
Yeah, how did you get certified in first place, and tell us through a little bit how is that process of becoming a seaplane or amphibian pilot?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate at the beginning of my career. I did my license when I was 18. I was finished by the time I was 19. I was looking for a job, and my dad had a seaplane company, actually. It was a single aircraft. It was a Cessna 206 on straight floats. So it was a float plane, not a flying boat. And it was never something that I was always going to, Dad always had a job for me type thing. But the GFC, it was the time of the GFC. There was not really many pilot jobs around, around 2009. And he needed some help in his busy months in the summer, and I decided to go do my float plane endorsement and help him out. And I think at the stage of his business, he was ready for someone else to come and help him out. Like it was, he was generally flying 5-6 days a week and then doing book work on the 7th day. So he hadn't really had a break for a couple of years. And when I came along, he was just like, you can take all the flying. I'm just going to sit back and, help out when needed. But so it was a pretty lucky break, not just at the start of a career to get a flying job. As we all know, that the first job is pretty difficult wherever you are, but to get it onto a seaplane was pretty cool. And that's when my kind of passion for seaplanes started, and then kind of went on from there. But the training was just on a Cessna 185. It was over a couple of days. It generally involves a couple of hours of theory about seaplane flying, and then about 5 to 7 hours of flying, depending on where you're at your career and whatnot. So, and what kind of flying you've done in the past. It is very similar to tailwheel flying. If anyone's done a lot of tailwheel flying, it's a lot more hands and feet flying. So generally I've found as well that pilots who use their feet a lot, in fact, I've done a lot of seaplane training with helicopter pilots, and they are generally very skilled at their hands and feet flying because that's what they do all the time. So yeah, if anyone's out there that's done tailwheel flying, you probably pick up seaplane stuff pretty quickly.
When you want to start nowadays, Guilherme mentioned the Buccaneer, and I saw as well that CB.
Yep. Yeah, so that was because in Australia, I think it's starting to become more consistent around the world that this design feature training that I'm doing does not need to be through a school. It's just run by me myself. It's not like an instrument rating training or anything. And I was just contacted by someone a group of people who had bought a CB, which is once again is actually coincidentally again is a 1947 aircraft. But this one is, if anyone has never seen one before, you should Google it. It's a very different looking aircraft. Yeah. And so I flew down to Adelaide, down the south of Australia, and spent 10 days down there doing a fair bit of seaplane flying with them. And that was an amazing trip actually. That I was the owner also had a Marchetti S211 jet trainer, so 2-seat fighter jet trainer, and so I got to have a fly in that with him and feel the G's for the first time. Nothing serious, but not enough to make me sick. Put it that way. A non-aerobatic pilot. So that was a really cool experience. But yeah, the CB was another fun flying boat that I got to have a go at.
And they are mainly they are old airplanes, right? So the Buccaneer isn't young design either. Is there anything new that you think it's like really picking up, like the Icon 5 or something?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the story of the flying boat was that it was very popular back in the 30s and 40s because there was no runways, so anywhere there was water. And we look at the planet Earth, there's a lot more water than there is land. So, and a lot of the towns are based around the coast. So the flying boat was popular choice quite early, but then post World War II, there was a lot more runways and infrastructure for land-based airplanes was more invested in. And that was kind of the death of the flying boat, I guess. And as you mentioned, a lot of these designs are very old designs. And these days, I think it's a lot easier to manufacture floats and put them on existing land planes like the Cessna 206, for example, or the Cessna Caravan. And then it also gives you that option of having a land plane. So, but I think that where flying boats are going these days is more in the kind of experimental, private sector, which is what you spoke about there, Felix, with the Icon A5 being a very popular sport aircraft. And then there's a few even 4-seat twin-engine flying boats that are starting to be built, some in Russia, some in Malaysia that have just started up as well. So I think that's probably what we'll see in the future at the moment. It's just those kind of smaller experimental and private sector aircraft, because there's just not that much of a use for them these days. Yeah.
Will you get sad when they change the six-pack, the analog gauges to a full glass cockpit? Because pretty much that's the future.
Yeah. Yes and no. Like, some of the cockpits you can get these days are pretty impressive and obviously great for situational awareness. The six-pack we have can be a little bit outdated. So as good as it is to go to be on analogs, I think the digital age is just as fun as and enhancing for a pilot experience. So I don't think we don't have plans to do that at all in the future at this stage. But probably one of the problems with us in the Mallard is that we fall into the commuter category of aircraft. So we're kind of in between GA and in between airlines. And one thing that comes with that is that our instrumentation needs to be at a higher standard. And unfortunately, a lot of these new technology glass cockpit options that are made, say, for example, the G5, the little, small gauge there, it's only certified for kind of general aviation aircraft. So, we've got a vacuum pump AH in our co-pilot's instrument panel, pardon me, and it's apparently more certified, like it's a higher standard than these new technology Garmin products, for example, but they always break. Like, we'd be much better having this Garmin thing in there for sure. So that's a bit of a frustrating thing. And then, so unfortunately, we've got to kind of stick with these old certified aircraft instruments rather than getting some new kind of modern panels. But yeah, that's the way it is.
Apparently he's going the other direction there, Enrique, because I think he would rather have that G5. So recently I did my IR rating in Brazil again, and I flew our Air Club's Piper PA-28 with the G5 suite, those two gauges on it, and I was simply amazed. Like, you can, engage indicated airspeed climb. So it's just like a flight level change with 76 knots, which is the optimum speed for the PA-28. So you go like climbing. We did our nav approach with the glide path, and I was like, holy mother! And I was like, this is amazing. So it comes with this with its own charms as well, having such a good.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be able to use it to that potential because we don't have an autopilot. So everything is hands free, but we'd be able to use heading bugs and stuff like a little bit more useful. But one thing that's impressive, when we've got the Garmin's 650 and 750 GPSs, and what you can do through those is pretty impressive as well. Like, setting up a visual approach and having a 3D, CDI and glide slope for your visual approach at an airport is very handy. So I just thought some of I flew a G1000 Caravan in Vietnam on floats, and I just thought that the G1000 equipment was great for situational, and especially in an IFR operation. So.
Oh, and then talking about all this technology helping you on the flying, what was the most challenging situation you faced while flying the flying boats? Do you have anything you remember that was a difficult time? To give the listeners, I guess, a bit more of an idea of the environment that we fly in up here is it's always hot. We don't have cold weather in Darwin. In fact, it's a little bit cold at the moment, and it's about 28 degrees Celsius. That's our cold temps. So, but in the wet season, we get thunderstorms, and it's a bit funny with our IFR flying, for example, 6 months of the year in our dry season, it's blue sky. So we fly IFR in VMC conditions. And then when it comes to the wet season, it's always thunderstorms. So you're flying IFR and avoiding cloud. So it's very rare that you actually spend a lot of time in
some good, cloud to do IFR flying. But then there are days in the wet when you have like a tropical low, or the trough that moves over the top of Australia, and you get the kind of set-in rain, heavy rain, and you can spend 2 hours in pretty bouncy weather on instruments, and as I mentioned, no autopilot, so it's all hand flying. And then you get the other end there, and it's blowing 25 knots on the water, and you've got to tuck the aeroplane into a small bay, and just to be able to find somewhere that's smooth enough for a landing. I think they're the days probably that are some of the most challenging, and they're solid 5-6 hour flight days. So in humid, hot temperatures. So it's pretty draining. I think that's probably the most challenging is just the environment that we go into more than anything else. Yeah,
it's amazing. And now on the other end, what was the flight or the landing or the place that you've been with the flying boat that you like look to one side, you look to the other side, and those days that we realized like, oh my God, I'm really doing this. Like, what was the most like number one flying that you had?
Well, that's got to be every day at work, doesn't it? It's just
a good one.
just the fact that you look out the window every day, you take off, and you're looking at the wing of a 75-year-old flying boat. But no, I think we did in 2019 we did a safari, we call it, where we flew from Darwin all the way just to the north of Sydney. Now, if anyone actually looks at that on a map, it's a very, very long flight. But we did it over 4 days, and we took 8 people there, and then we did this event called the Rathmines Catalina Festival. It was a seaplane festival basically down there in Australia, and it's nothing big. There's nothing like America or anything like that have these huge big festivals. But we did that over 4 days and took these guests down, and I think that was pretty cool actually. Well, first of all, actually taking the plane to the Whitsundays in Australia and landing at Whitehaven Beach, which is one of the most. It was actually voted number 1 beach in Australia a couple of years ago, and it was also where I did a lot of my seaplane flying in beavers and caravans. And to take the Mallard there, where I hadn't been for 5 years, was pretty cool. Like rocking up to the same beach that I was there 5 years ago, and in beautiful, beavers, for example. So that was pretty impressive. But then at the end of the trip, we landed at Rathmines, and Rathmines is in a lake, but it's a World War II Catalina base. And it was pretty amazing to kind of come in, land there, and go up the old Catalina ramp. We put the gear down in the water, drove the plane up the ramp, and then we had about 50 people standing around the plane afterwards, all amazed at the fact that this Mallard is actually has come here, because previously to this we didn't really do many trips like this at all. It was only just for work. It was only for the pearls. So I think that was probably one of the highlights as well. Yeah. And
for that, did you went around, or did you pretty much cut through inland?
No, we had to go inland. We went inland to a place called Longreach first, and Longreach has a really good Qantas museum. It was kind of the birthplace of Qantas, Australia's biggest airline and oldest airline. And so we went to there, but because it's really hard because it's a flying boat. So what do you want to do? You want to land on the water, but then we're cutting across the middle of Australia, going from runway to runway. We're displaying exactly the reason why flying boats don't exist anymore. And so when we got to a place called Mount Isa, it was for another fuel stop. This is our second fuel stop for the day. And they have a big lake there though. So we were just like, well, it's a flying boat. Let's go put this thing in the water. So we just took it over to the water. We did a water landing for all the guests, and taxied around for a little bit, did a takeoff, and then continued on. So at least they got a little bit of seaplane experience, I guess, for that day. And then from Longreach, we cut across to the Whitsundays, and we did kind of water stops most of the way there. And then when we got to the festival, we did 2 days worth of scenic flights for passengers who wanted to pay. And so, people got to go on the Mallard for a half an hour kind of scenic tour. And that worked really well, actually. It was just great fun. Weather was beautiful. Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think we had a few people who actually went a couple of times. I don't know how they wrangled that, but they got to go a few times because, why not?
Daniel, when you mentioned doing the charters, do you go northeast to Cairns for the Great Barrier Reef?
No, not really. Our charters kind of go as far east as kind of Gove area, which is at the eastern tip of the Northern Territory, and then west into the Kimberley as well, to that same area. The charters are more, probably our most predominant charter is a fishing charter. So because the areas that we fly to are so remote, these fishing boats can just park themselves in the middle of nowhere, and then we can fly their guests in and out to the boat directly. And that saves them a whole 2 days of travel going back and forward to an airport that's nearby. So, that's probably our main clientele. And then also remote kind of camps that are set up on the coast that are far away from an airport that would either require a helicopter or a seaplane from another location to come in. So we can kind of get them straight there from a capital city, which is a lot more helpful for their business.
That's very nice. Then you also host your own podcast. Can you tell us about your podcast a bit more?
Yeah, so it's called On the Step with That Mallard Guy. And I started this a couple of years ago during the COVID lockdowns and everything. Basically had a bit more spare time on my hands back then. And it's just simply it's similar to most of these podcasts, an interview style podcast with a guest from around the world talking about seaplane flying. And I'm still trying to do it when I can. Unfortunately, I'm a lot more busier now, especially with the seaplane training, and now I have 2 kids. I've got baby number 3 on the way, so life is very busy. But I really enjoy just doing like this, talking to people about their experiences with seaplanes and sharing that. And I think I'm up to episode 69, so I've done a fair few interviews over the time with people from all around the world talking about their flying stories. And it's had great feedback, and it's really cool. Probably like what you guys would get, getting messages through Instagram or LinkedIn or something, and just people telling you how much they love hearing all the stories and everything. And hopefully it's building up a bit more knowledge and a bit more of a profile for seaplane flying, all around the world.
In general,
that's very nice. We started. I mean, Félix started the same way during the pandemic, with Farol de Pouso. So pretty similar. And also, you and Félix have something in common. Both of your wives are pilots.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say we're both good looking, but
yeah, that too. But come on,
he's not that a good liar, man.
Yeah. My wife's a helicopter pilot, so we actually met when we were in the Whitsundays. She was flying helicopters, and I was flying seaplanes, and we just she's not flying helicopters anymore commercially. She still keeps her license current and flies casually or privately when she can, but the opportunities for flying helicopters where we are kind of not very available, and also there's not a lot of places that we really would like to take a helicopter that are nearby. The last time we flew, she was 6 months pregnant with our daughter, and we had a 1-year-old, and she flew the helicopter in the Whitsundays out to Whitehaven, that beach I was talking about before, and out to another little coral cave, and we all had lunch together. But 6 months pregnant with the cyclic in her tummy, it was pretty funny. She's actually now the business manager of Paspaley Aviation, so the Mallards. So she runs everything from commercial development with our clients. She runs the operations. She runs the maintenance side of things as well, scheduling and everything. So it's a very busy job. and but she does a great job at it, and she loves. I think obviously as pilots we love flying, but I think sometimes flying a plane from A to B can be a little bit mundane. We like other challenges in our life, and I think she was at the stage where she wanted to use her brain a little bit more and more of a challenging environment, and she's certainly getting it with this job. Managing 3 75-year-old flying boats, not an easy task.
I guess so. She's exploring new sets of skills, and
exactly.
It must be absolutely different to just flying. Yeah. Enrique, you said you had some questions. Throw them in.
Some hard questions, apparently.
Yeah. So you just said about your wife's licenses, and pretty much that's a kind of a technical one. So do you have to maintain your land licenses as well, or like whenever you renew your seaplane, it automatically renew your land as well?
So good question. The land, there's no differential for land and seaplane. The best way I describe it is like learning to drive a car. You learn to drive in an automatic. So you get your license and you know the rules very well. You know how the car works. But then the seaplane is like driving the manual. It's just that little bit different. So there's no actual currency for seaplane stuff. And in fact, there's not actually a currency for doing water landings. It's all just the regulations just state takeoffs and landings. For example, the 3 in 90 days. I think that's a general rule around the world that most people will follow. So we just have to comply with that. And with the land versus sea, we're generally doing at least 1 water landing, 1 water takeoff, and 1 land landing, 1 land takeoff every flight. So we're kind of well and truly meeting those currencies. But we do have, actually, I guess one difference is within our company, we have what's called a water check. So every 12 months, we will go out there and actually do a company prescribed water check during an OPC, for example. And it just involves, it's more of an opportunity to take the airplane out and actually throw it around a bit more and have a bit more, and kind of experiment a little bit more with your own skill set and learn a few more things. But it's not really a testing environment, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, and I saw that the aircraft, whenever it's on land, it's really close to the ground, have a really low clearance. So What is easier to land on the water or on the land? And what's the major difference between the two environments?
Look, I don't think there's one that's easier or probably land landings are probably easier because they're more consistent. There's less variables with a land landing. But I think with the water landing, you come in a little bit flatter on the flying boat. So you don't necessarily flare. So on a runway, you can actually kind of flare the airplane like normal, hold it off, have that nose popping right up and touch down, gently on the mains. But with a flying boat touching down on the hull, you've really got to have a correct attitude, and the attitude has to remain the same all the time. And it's quite flat. It's actually a lot flatter in the Buccaneer, for example, than the Mallard. But so there's a bit less room for error with that. That's probably the main difference. And then obviously, like I said before, there's more variables with the water landing. So taking into all those factors I mentioned before. And some things like our runways don't have to be straight on the water. It's something people don't really think about. Is we can have a curved runway. We can take off, and you might take off into the wind, but you've got terrain in front of you, so you have to do a turn on the water. So that's when it really becomes quite fun,
For those who are listening, when he mentioned OPC, that's operations proficiency check. So it's the airline check, right? So if you have engine failure at takeoff, do you have to maintain you don't have to maintain a center line, do you?
Well, that's a good question because, as I mentioned before, this aircraft made. I'm sorry, I know you're trying to joke there, but I'm going to give you.
No, it's a joke, answer. But maybe not. Yeah.
No, it's a good question because this aircraft, as I mentioned before, meets the commuter category standards. So, for example, if we have an engine failure at V1, we have to be able to maintain terrain clearance on one engine. So that's all factored into the design, which is really cool because I want to know that I'm safe if we have an engine failure at V1. But yeah, so I guess from a land perspective, we have the same. When we're taking off on land, we have very similar rules and regulations that say a small turboprop aircraft would have. But on the water, for example, we have a couple more options, and we actually have 3 types of departures. A type 1 departure is basically you have an engine failure at V1 and then you are able to just maintain the climb directly in front. So let's say you're at a huge big lake or a river that goes straight for many, many miles. You have no terrain in front of you. A type 2 departure is where you can take off and do a full turn around. Like you might be in a high terrain lake, for example, and you can turn around. And we have actually got in our ops manual some prescriptions of how far the distance needs to be at different weights. It can be quite complicated. And then the third one is the third type departure is where you can climb up, have an engine failure, and then decide to land and still have enough distance in front of you before the water ends to do a landing back on the remaining runway as such. So that bringing those IFR, or commuter category terrain clearance standards into water operations can be quite difficult, and that's one of the things that makes it really unique as well.
So you see, that's total ignorance when you're joking about something really serious, because you have no idea about all those types of operations, right?
Well, here's another one for you, Felix, because for example, generally it's I'm not sure if it's the same for you guys in the bigger airlines, but generally you have the kind of 4 stages, the 4 segments in the climb. The first one's generally up to 35 feet, and then 35 feet to 400. The first one is with gear down. So, but we're a flying boat, our gear's already retracted, and then we have the third segment's generally 400 feet to the flap retraction speed. Well, we take off with 0 flap. So there's some differences in that whole thing being a flying boat that, especially with the gear already being up for takeoff, that we kind of got guaranteed performance a bit better on the water in a way.
Yes. Yeah, and and then that 35 feet clearance, can you change it to somewhere, or do you calculate water run performance, so that you know, I would just, it's hard to assume things when you don't know, but maybe when you touch the hole on the water, you have reversers, so I would say it's easier to stop, because I did some of the twin otter flying in some places down there. Okay. So I remember when you sit down, the deceleration is it's fairly quick, but the takeoff run, the water run can take more time, right? Yeah,
but generally with the landing, that reverse thrust is not available for the performance, the landing performance charts. It's generally only brakes, and anything you get from reverse thrust is a bonus. But with the takeoff, we've basically got tables in our ops manual that you look at what your takeoff weight is, and it'll give you a distance, for example, and then it'll give you a distance to 35 feet and up to 400. And then you can use that distance to 400 feet from the starting point. And we basically just use a EFB, electronic flight bag, to just go onto a chart, measure that distance on the chart where we are in our current position, and see if we theoretically have enough room for that takeoff. But yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How do you measure the distance if you're on water?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because, when we think about airport flying with this type of concept, it's all been mapped out for us, hasn't it? All of the displays and, the terrain data and everything. Whereas you go into a water landing aerodrome, well, you could be anywhere, and it's not built for an airport. So, yeah, that's probably one of the bigger challenges, I guess, from an operational perspective, is is factoring in all of these unique things that are designed for airports into somewhere that's not an airport, you know?
I think we would get crushed. We would get crushed in guess the distance just by looking.
Yeah.
With Daniel.
No, it's like I was thinking maybe like if you have EFB, you have most likely a present shift position, and then you can just put that buffer for the estimated position uncertainty, and off you go if it's tight.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the good thing is we don't operate generally to lakes, for example. So we're mainly open ocean, and you know the ocean goes on forever in some spots. But we could be in a bay that we're taking off into the bay. Now, can we do it if we have an engine failure? Can we do a full 180-degree turn inside the bay? Well, these charts will tell us that. And if we can't, well, can we actually take off into the bay and outclimb the terrain on one engine? You know, so it's super helpful. But generally, as an operating side of things, we don't generally look at these because of the areas that we go to are very open.
Then we mentioned like the differences in the hull between the Mallard and the Buccaneer, but I was thinking about corrosion and like what could happen on the hull damage.
Yep.
Like a stone strike, let's say.
Yeah, there's not many floating stones, so that's a
of course not, or log strike.
Yeah, log's more likely. Now, look, once again, a lot of the areas we go to that we don't actually have a lot of floating debris because they're not, say, like a river or a melt, you know, like an ice melt area where there's, you know, a lot of snow that melts and drags stuff down. But yeah, look, well, probably actually our biggest threat is hitting a crocodile, I'd say. But yeah, look, I mean, there's certainly been instances in the past, not on the Mallards, but just anywhere in the world where you hit things on the water and can cause damage, can cause a hole in the aircraft. And then, yeah, it's not all over. It's, you know, you got to think about, is the aircraft going to sink? Is the aircraft going to stay afloat? Do I have to go and taxi it up onto a beach? Do I have to, you know, try and save the aircraft there? So that's certainly something, another consideration as well, I guess, yeah.
And we talked about maintenance. We talked about the engine failures. And what about the salty water on the airplane?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I forgot the first question. Sorry. Yeah.
Do you wash the planes and then, or how is the maintenance behind flying into the ocean?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest challenges of running a seaplane that runs into the salt water is corrosion. So yeah, generally after every day we would bring the plane back, and then we split our duties up between whoever is pilot flying or pilot monitoring at the start of the day. So every second turn, technically, you'd be the guy who washes the plane down. All the captains do it. It's not like it's an FO's job. So yeah, we wash the plane down completely. With fresh water, like really detailed. It's not just a quick, you know, hose over the top and it's all done. It's trying to get fresh water into all of the little parts of the aeroplane where salt water could sit, and we're trying to flush that out. And then, you know, then there's other things like adding anti-corrosion products to it, like pushing the salt water out of the bearings and the wheels with more grease. With a product called ACF 50 is a popular one for anti-corrosion. Inox is another one, a lubricant and an anti-corrosive spray. So, yeah, and then it's just about treatment, you know. When it comes to 100 hourlies or phase checks, you know that there's going to be a bit of work on corrosion. There's different types of corrosions. You can get stuff that really digs into the metal or stuff that kind of flakes up the top. So you want to try and avoid those ones that are, you know, a little bit more damaging, and you got to be on top of them a bit quicker. But yeah, corrosion's a big one, and there's always checks going on and making sure that the parts are fit, you know, for travel.
How do you do your pre-flight inspections, especially when you are on water? Because I know that you guys fly with shorts, but I don't think that you guys go swimming and do a lap around the aircraft around that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we kind of can't leave the airplane on water overnight. Probably the biggest limiting factor there is insurance. So it's generally always at a land-based airport overnight. So yeah, I think when I was in the Whitsundays, or in general, we never really are in the water with the airplane, to be honest, because we have, as I mentioned before, we have crocodiles up here, which thrive pretty much, and I think they find human meat pretty tasty. So we're never really in the water with the airplane. But in the Whitsundays, when we were at the beach, I was able to get out and actually swim around the plane for the first time, probably in my experiences with the Mallard, and that was kind of fun. That was kind of see the airplane in a different perspective. And yeah, I don't think it'd be a different daily inspection if you did it from the water level,
Daniel, it's been 1 hour and some minutes already, and I think we could drag along for quite a while if you start digging into more and more details. But I honestly find it so enriching, because I think the main aspects of your operation, we could have, we could build a picture on that, especially with all these details on the vocabulary that you're able to bring to us. And we need to thank you as well for being patient and most likely talking on a slightly lower pace than you usually do, right?
I think sometimes I may have forgot to do that a few times.
No. It was really good. I'm very happy, and I think our audience would be very glad as well to come to this stage and say, well, that wasn't that bad. They say Australians have a difficult accent, mate, but that's not the case here, right?
Yeah.
And also, we really love your sense of humor, and especially that part of the floating
rock,
the floating stones or rock. Yeah. So, how is the clearance? Like, how deep do you need to be?
Our about 0.8 of a meter is what the book says. So yeah, probably. I'd say a good meter depth would probably be safe to clear any obstacles underneath. Yeah.
We are, like me and Guilherme especially, we are really good with firm landings, right? So do you always do that grease job on the water, or can you do hard landings on the water?
Look, I guess sometimes there's a bit more flexibility with your water landing area, that you can finesse the landing a little bit more. I imagine flying, the big jets like you guys do, you don't have as much fudge factor, I would say, to get the landing wrong. So, but there are times where you do have to really hit the spot, and probably one of the other things thinking about it is we generally have a really good clearway behind, that we come in over. So you might have to hit a spot, but you might be able to fly at 5 feet off the water for a kilometre or a mile until you get to that spot. So I think it's a lot easier to hit the spot and hit it smoothly. But look, everyone does some Félix landings every now and again. So
you got the feeling.
I'll let you know if I pull a Félix landing in the future at all. Okay.
Absolutely, man. We just met, for a couple of minutes ago or the past hour, and we're already making fun of each other. Actually, mainly you're making more fun of me than the vice versa, but it's fine. Yeah. I normally take that because it happens a lot. And
I get that.
Then Daniel Bolton, where you gonna be, or what you gonna do in the next 5 to 10 years, like?
Well, I just we actually just bought a house.
Don't tell your current employee. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
employer.
Yeah. No, we just bought a house actually in Darwin. probably one of the worst times ever to buy a house, but we still did it, mainly because of the whole kid factor. But so, we didn't think we'd be here for that long. I thought the original plan was a 5-year plan, I think, and that's kind of now passed, about 5 years in April this year. So, it's a really good job. It's good lifestyle with the family up here. I love the flying. I can't ever see myself doing flying that's maybe potentially airline flying. I don't know. Obviously, there's other perks with what comes with airline flying than the actual hands and feet flying, I guess, that I don't get here. But I think I could quite easily see myself here another 5-10 years. And I'm really enjoying now doing the seaplane training in the Buccaneer. It adds a bit more variety. I think I'll most likely we'll do a recap episode in 10 years' time, and I'll probably be still here. So
that's good.
Still talk about the Mallard. Yeah.
If we both have the podcast in 10 years from now, maybe I'll certify it myself, and you can teach me how to waterland.
Okay.
And then we can do like a parallel approaches into both podcasts.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then until then, we can go up to Darwin and visit you guys over there. Because with all these details, man, I'm really interested in like learning more about like performance on a twin engine seaboat airliner like that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and probably one of the biggest ones to look out for is probably the Maldives. They have, I think there's something like 75 twin otter flying boats, float planes, in one country, which is literally the size of two small islands, which is pretty insane to think that there is that. I mean, how many other airlines in the world have 75 aircraft in general, let alone seaplanes? So there's some pretty amazing stuff going on over there with seaplanes. I'll continue to share. Hopefully, I'd like to get into more of the YouTube stuff, and I've got a couple of stuff on YouTube which kind of show a bit into more depth of what it's like to actually be in the cockpit with some audio and some longer videos to see what it's actually like to be in the crew. But that's probably the one thing I'd like to do more of in the future when I have a bit more time, is to share some longer experiences. But yeah, and just quickly while I think about it, I want to shout out to the kind of South American following, because Brazil is a huge country who follow my Instagram page. Actually, just behind the United States, Brazil's the second most popular following that the page has. So there's a lot of interest from people in South America. I think that they're interested in this type of flying, and there are a lot of some seaplane operations in Brazil. Shout out to, I guess, all those people who are listening.
I always think that especially in the Amazon region, such a nice airplane will be very, very good to have, to operate in and out there. I think, for quite a long time, the airliners, they used to operate Catalinas up in the Amazon. And actually my first Boeing 737 TRE, he was a Catalina FO back in the days, and and he always told us that story when once they were about to moor the Catalina, and there was a black log, and they just like started steering, and not as yours, they didn't have thrust reversers, so they couldn't just reverse the Catalina out of that situation. And when he hit the log, it was full of spiders. So it was black because it was full of spiders. So the spiders was trying to climb the hole and just close the hatch, and he comes back to the cockpit. It's full of spiders. Let's get out of here. So something like that. Guilherme.
Yeah, that's nice.
Dan, thank you so much. It was a pleasure listening all your stories. As I said before, I've been a follower a long time on Instagram, and knowing a bit more of your flying is just it's just absolutely amazing, man. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being here today. It was such a huge pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
No worries. I'm sorry it took so long to come on, but I'm glad we kindly got this done and could have a chat. So appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Never mind the delay, because we know that we have all these rosters and changes, and for us as well, sometimes it's really hard. Actually, most of the times every week is hard to get, a crew to do this podcast on the way we want to do it. So at least 3 or 4 of us, so that we can have different opinions and different insights on those matters. And we really wish you the best of success on your career. So you keep flying long time with amazing airplanes, and for your family as well. So you have the 3rd baby on the way, yeah?
Yeah, yep. Number 3 due around Christmas time. So if life wasn't busy enough now, it's going to be certainly busier around then.
That's it. And once again, thank you so much, and thanks for being part of our podcast. This has been another amazing international episode here in Farol de Pouso podcast, and we are gladly supported by Hangar 33 and Hangar 33. Just go ahead and do your online purchases using the e-commerce voucher Born to Fly, and go ahead and check Realizar Escola de Aviação Civil. Once again, this is Félix, and welcome, and thank you for listening. Ciao, bye-bye.
See ya.
Take care.
Niemeyer, 25.